Whenever he discusses crime and guns in America, Donald Trump always brings up Chicago. This is what he said about the city shortly after taking office.
It's horrible carnage. Afghanistan is not like what's happening in Chicago. People are being shot left and right.
In June, Trump pointed to Chicago again, tweeting, quote, "Crime and killing in Chicago have reached such epidemic proportions that I am sending in federal help. 1,714 shootings in Chicago this year." The federal help to which Trump referred was 20 agents from the Bureau of Tobacco, Alcohol, and Firearms dispatched to Chicago to work with local enforcement in targeting gun trafficking. To be sure, gun violence in Chicago is a serious problem. As of the end of September, the city recorded nearly 500 people killed and over 2,800 others wounded by gun violence this year, and nearly 7,000 firearms have been confiscated. But although Chicago and the state of Illinois have tough gun restrictions that include requiring licenses and permits, as well as a waiting period to purchase firearms, many of the guns that flow into Chicago are from the neighboring states of Indiana and Wisconsin, who have far more lax gun laws. Joining us by Skype from Chicago is Mick Dumke, a reporter for ProPublica Illinois. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I've been reading a lot that you have been writing on this issue, and really find it intriguing that the president and the administration are not giving the American public more of an explanation of exactly what is happening in Chicago and why. And could you just enlighten us a little bit about how guns are getting into Chicago?
Well, I think the best way to explain it actually comes from a young man who is in federal prison I've been writing back and forth with, who was caught up in this gun case that we ended up zooming in on a story that came out earlier this week.
Is that Bob Jones?
This guy's name is Wesley Pickett, actually, and he's in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. And when I asked him where guns are coming from in Chicago, he said, it's hard to say because they come from everywhere. And I think that it's the absurdity of that comment gets right at what's going on here. It really doesn't matter to some degree what regulations there are in the city of Chicago. There are no gun stores in Chicago, but as you noted just a few minutes ago, 7,000 illegally transferred weapons have ended up here and have been found by police so far this year alone. So, as you noted, they're coming in from all the surrounding states and from some parts of Illinois outside of the city as well.
Now, tell me a little bit about his case. I read about someone else, and I don't know if it's the same person, but I read, for example, that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, at least with one individual I read about, actually found out that this person was suffering a personal financial crisis, needed money. This was not someone who was engaged in criminal activity, was certainly not a gun dealer, and basically enticed him into selling guns. And the man actually took, the few $100s he made to buy diapers, food for his daughter. He was a primary caregiver, but this was not someone who was originally a gun dealer, and he ended up doing time for it. And and it seems to me that what they should be doing is going after the actual gun dealers.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the story we zoomed in on. The gentleman I quoted just a minute ago was another defendant in the same case.
Okay.
We focused on a character by the name of John Thomas, who, as you noted, just a couple days ago actually reported to federal prison in Illinois. And in 2014, he was desperate for money. He had a young infant daughter. And basically, a confidential informant for the ATF ended up enticing him into doing gun deals. And they did a lot of them over the next few months. John Thomas himself was involved in like 23 different transactions involving a total of 77 guns. And that's not a small number, as the judge noted at his sentencing a few weeks ago. But as you pointed out, there's no evidence John was ever involved in selling guns before the government started spending taxpayer money to set up these buys.
Exactly, and to entice them to it. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a lot of guns, and obviously there's a huge problem in Chicago. But I believe I read that he made $700 and said that was the most money he'd ever made, and he's going to do a lot of time after being enticed to do this by the government.
Yeah, I mean, at the time he had a legit job that was paying him only like $125 a week, so he was really scraping by. And I think over the course of 7 months, he made several $1,000s total. So he still wasn't making very much money. We're still talking about maybe a couple $100 in the average week. But there was more money than he had going on at the time. And, you know, John is the first person to say, look, I did it. I'm guilty. I need to pay my penalty. But basically, the government created a gun market here. We do have problems with illegal guns flowing into the city, but in this particular case, and many like it, the government, through its setups and its sting operations, actually creates a gun network and then works to dismantle it.
Mr. Dumke, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thank you for your reporting. I'm going to go to my panel, Barbara Arnwine, Brandon Cooper, and Amber J. Phillips. Amber, let's talk to you first. One of the things that I was struck with when he said that the government has created this the gun market in Chicago, and you know, my brain immediately goes to allegations that the government created the crack epidemic in the United States. And who does it have a disproportionately negative impact on? Our people.
Right.
What did you think about that?
I also heard him talk about this lack of access to jobs and employment. And to me, that is, if we're talking about guns and violence in Chicago, if we don't start at those root cause, we are talking about a short-term solution for a problem that has had a long-term impact on Chicago.
Yeah.
So yes, we can have this conversation about gun violence, and I appreciate the work that he's doing to get deeper about where these guns are coming from, but we also need to hear these triggers around people are scraping by to survive.
Yes.
The government is creating a system in which scraping or finding alternatives to scraping by are much more lucrative than what we can do with minimum wage or the lack of government funding towards people in communities in Chicago. And I think that's an important point to know.
Brandon, so I wanted to touch base with you. So he's telling us that we've got these guns in Chicago coming in from Wisconsin, Indiana. We've got Republican governors. They are, you know, pro-gun rights. But making Chicago seem as if it is some sort of jungle with all of the people there killing themselves. What's the solution? What do you think is the solution that we're going to see coming out of Republican Governors Association? We know what Trump thinks.
Yeah, a couple of things. And I say again, I'm unconscionable why he continues to harp on Chicago. I think it's about, you know, feeding to his base or whatever and doing that stuff. Actually, Baltimore per capita has worse violence than Chicago. But I'm agreeing 100% with Amber. I think that the issue of gun violence in Chicago, if you look beneath the layers, it's a socioeconomic issue and also just a culture of violence. Everybody's talking about guns, but if you look at stabbing rates, assault rate, rapes, all that stuff is higher in the United States and other countries as well. So it's not just guns. And if you look at statistics, there's not a statistic that shows that gun ownership or higher gun ownership means higher gun violence.
Yeah.
It is not the case. Since the last 20 years, 50% higher increase in gun ownership in America, and the gun violence has dropped 50%. So I think when you focus on the issue of guns, you're missing the cause of it. The cause of it is much lower and deeper into the community and longer standing than, you know, the gun issue. But I do agree, like you said, the facts are that a lot of the guns, I think 60% of the guns are coming in from outside of Chicago. So that's definitely an issue that needs to be looked at.
Barbara, I was going to come to you, but we have to go to break, so I'm going to come back to you after the break. Barbara, I want to talk to you a little bit more about gun violence in Chicago. I promise to come back to you. Share your thoughts, please.
Yes, I just think that the whole segment reminded us that there's what you call dumb and lazy policing. Because using entrapment the way they did here, instead of actually investigating and finding out who were the real dealers of guns in the streets.
And arresting them.
And it was just a real waste of taxpayers' money. And I think it's very important for us to insist on smart policing always.
So in addition to smart policing, quickly, what's the solution?
Well, the solution to me is what we were talking about earlier. I mean, every study that's been done in Chicago where they've gone in and actually offered young people jobs, gun violence goes down among those young people.
Yeah,
it disappears.
It's basic. Amber, you spoke about it earlier. It's just common sense.
It really
what
is.
happens when you have a job, a good education, and a way out, and you don't have the government
or an art program? Give me anything. Give me options.
And programs to encourage the hiring of Chicagans.
We're on a break.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no. That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.